It was one of those quiet Saturday afternoons when the air felt calm and the streets moved at an easy pace. The grocery store at the corner of Maple Avenue was busier than usual. People walked in and out carrying paper bags, and the sound of shopping carts filled the entrance. Laura had just finished her long shift at the precinct. She was tired. Her back ached from standing most of the day, but she wanted to grab a few things before heading home. She parked her car at the far end of the lot, stretched a little, and walked toward the store with her small list folded in her hand. Laura was an off-duty police officer. She wasn't in uniform, but out of habit. She carried her service weapon in a concealed holster under her jacket. It was part of her daily routine. She was cautious, never reckless. Her weapon stayed hidden and safely secured, and she rarely thought about it outside of work. To her, it was just another part of being prepared. But that day, she had no idea how one small glimpse of it would turn an ordinary grocery trip into something she would never forget. Inside the store, Laura walked through the produce aisle, picking up a few fresh items and taking her time. She smiled at an older woman by the apples and helped her reach a bag from the top shelf. Laura always had a quiet kindness about her. She didn't draw attention to herself and spoke with a calm, steady voice. She moved to the next aisle, unaware that someone was watching her closely. Karen was standing by the bakery section, holding her phone in one hand and a cart filled with snacks in the other. She was known around the neighborhood as someone who always noticed everything. She had an opinion about everyone and didn't hesitate to voice it. When Laura leaned forward to grab a jar of sauce, her jacket lifted just enough for the grip of the handgun to show for a second. That single second was enough for Karen's heart to race. Her eyes widened and she froze. She whispered to herself, convinced she had just seen a dangerous person in the store. Instead of thinking it through, she immediately pulled out her phone and began recording, zooming in on Laura from behind a shelf. Her voice trembled as she spoke quietly to her camera, describing what she saw. Her mind filled with assumptions, imagining all kinds of worst-case scenarios. She didn't know Laura was a police officer, nor did she care to find out. To her, this was a crisis, and she believed she was the one to stop it. Laura continued shopping, placing a few boxes of cereal and some milk in her basket. She felt peaceful, unaware that someone was tailing her with a phone camera, whispering into it like a detective. Karen's thoughts grew louder in her head, convincing herself she had to do something before something bad happened. Her fear turned into boldness. She followed Laura through 3 aisles, pretending to browse items but keeping her camera pointed at her the whole time. When Laura reached the self-checkout, she placed her groceries on the counter and scanned them one by one. She didn't notice the strange glances from a few shoppers who had caught on to Karen's whispers. The tension started to spread quietly around them. A mother pulled her child closer, and 2 men exchanged confused looks, wondering what was going on. Karen finally couldn't take it anymore. She walked quickly out of the store, clutching her phone tightly. Once she reached her car, she dialed 911, her voice shaking but forceful. She told the dispatcher there was a woman in the grocery store with a gun. She said the woman looked suspicious, that she was hiding something, and that people were scared. The dispatcher asked if the woman had made any threats or acted aggressively. Karen said she hadn't, but insisted she was dangerous anyway. The call set things into motion. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars were sent to the store. Their sirens stayed off, but their lights flickered as they pulled into the parking lot. Customers near the entrance turned to look. Some didn't know what was happening, but they could feel something was wrong. The store manager, who was by the registers, received a call from the police telling him to keep people calm and stay clear of the exits. Inside, Laura was just placing her last item in a reusable bag when she noticed 2 officers entering. Her first thought was that they were there for a normal call, maybe a shoplifting report or a lost child. But then she saw the look on their faces, alert, focused, scanning the crowd. One of them rested a hand on his holster. The manager whispered something to them and pointed in her direction. Laura frowned, unsure what was happening. One of the officers approached carefully and said in a calm but serious tone that they needed to speak with her. The entire store seemed to quiet down. Laura placed her bag down slowly, raised her hand slightly, and said she was an off-duty officer. She reached for her wallet, keeping her movements slow and clear. The younger officer nodded and took her police identification card. The senior officer checked it carefully, then stepped aside to confirm it over the radio. Karen stood outside near her car, holding her phone up, recording everything with excitement. She thought she was about to witness a dramatic arrest, and her voice carried across the lot as she narrated what she believed was happening. Some customers stopped near the windows to watch. From where she stood, she couldn't hear what was being said inside, but when she saw the officers lowering their tone and relaxing, she began to frown. This wasn't the scene she expected. Inside, the senior officer returned, nodded, and handed Laura's ID back. He thanked her for her patience and quietly explained that someone had called in a report about her carrying a weapon. Laura sighed softly and shook her head. She told them she understood and that she always carried off duty with full authorization. The officers apologized for the confusion and assured her everything was fine. One of them even told her they'd handle the caller. When Laura walked outside, she saw Karen pacing near her car, phone still in hand. Their eyes met for the first time. Laura could tell right away who had made the call. Karen's face twisted with frustration as she pointed and shouted that they were covering for one of their own. The officers tried to calm her down, but she refused to listen. Her voice grew louder, echoing through the lot. She accused Laura of being a threat, claiming the police were ignoring a danger because of favoritism. The more she spoke, the more out of control it became. Laura stood quietly, not responding. She didn't want to embarrass her or escalate things. The officers gently asked Karen to lower her voice and step aside to give a statement, but she kept arguing. She waved her phone in the air, saying she had proof. Her recording showed only brief glimpses of Laura shopping peacefully. Nothing threatening at all. Yet Karen was too caught up in her story to stop. The store employees began to come outside, watching the commotion unfold. A few shook their heads, whispering among themselves. To them, it was clear who was calm and who was causing trouble. Even a few customers who had been nervous before now realized that Laura wasn't a threat at all. After several minutes, one of the officers pulled Karen aside to talk to her privately, trying to calm her. Laura picked up her groceries, feeling the weight of unwanted attention but still staying composed. She wasn't angry, just disappointed that fear and assumptions had caused so much chaos in such a short time. The sky had started to turn orange as the sun began to set, and the sound of sirens faded as one of the patrol cars left the scene. Laura thanked the officers for handling it professionally and walked toward her car. She could still hear Karen arguing behind her, demanding to speak to someone higher in command. Laura took a deep breath and tried to shake it off, but she couldn't help feeling uneasy. She wondered how many times situations like this happened to others. People judged too quickly for something misunderstood. She started her car, glanced once more toward the crowd still gathered, and drove away slowly. She didn't know it yet, but that would only be the beginning. What seemed like a simple misunderstanding was about to take a turn no one saw coming. The woman who had accused her was far from finished, and Laura's calm patience would soon be tested in ways she never expected. The next morning, the air felt heavy around town. Word had already started to spread about what happened at the grocery store. Some people shared bits of the story online, twisting the details into rumors. Laura tried to ignore it as she sipped her coffee, scrolling through her phone. A few local pages were buzzing with posts about a woman with a gun being confronted by police. None of them mentioned that she was a cop herself. It didn't take long before someone uploaded a short video clip, Karen's video, showing the moment officers entered the store. The caption read, "Armed woman causes panic at grocery store." Laura sighed. She had hoped the situation would die down quickly, but social media had made it worse. People were commenting without knowing the truth. Some defended her, saying it was probably legal. Others jumped to conclusions. Laura closed her phone and leaned back, trying to shake off the frustration. She had dealt with misunderstanding before, but this felt different because she hadn't even been in uniform. She was just living her life, doing something ordinary. At the same time, Karen sat in her car outside the same grocery store, looking at her video with a proud smile. She believed she had done something good. In her mind, she had protected people from danger. Even after being told the woman she called about was an officer, she refused to believe it. She told herself that the police had covered for one of their own, and that she wouldn't let it go. She started posting more online, sharing her version of the story. She claimed she was silenced, that her warnings had been ignored. The more people questioned her, the more defensive she became. It was as if she needed to prove she was right no matter what. At the precinct, Laura's supervisor called her in for a short meeting. He had seen the video too. He wasn't angry, just concerned. He asked how she was holding up. She told him she was fine, but he could tell the situation bothered her. He assured her the department knew she did nothing wrong. They had already spoken to the responding officers and everything checked out. Still, he warned her to be cautious, especially since the story was spreading online. Sometimes, he said, people's fear can twist the truth into something ugly. Later that afternoon, Laura decided to go back to the store to clear her head. She didn't expect to see Karen there again, but fate had other plans. As she walked through the parking lot, she spotted the same car from the night before, Karen's. She was sitting behind the wheel, typing on her phone. Laura hesitated but continued walking. She didn't want to create another scene. But when Karen looked up and saw her, her expression shifted instantly. She jumped out of her car and started walking fast toward her, phone in hand, recording again. Laura stopped, keeping her tone calm. She told her to please put the phone down and stop following her. Karen ignored her and started accusing her loudly, saying she was being protected by the system. A few people outside the store turned to look. Laura didn't want this to get out of hand, so she called one of her colleagues from the department, explaining what was happening. Within minutes, a patrol car pulled up. The same officer from the previous day stepped out, looking tired but polite. He asked what was going on. Laura stayed quiet, letting him handle it. Karen started ranting about corruption, waving her phone as proof. The officer listened patiently, trying to keep things calm. He reminded her that recording wasn't a problem, but harassing someone in public was. He asked her again to stop following Laura and to go home. Karen crossed her arms and refused, saying she had a right to hold people accountable. It was clear she wasn't just afraid anymore. She was obsessed. Laura quietly thanked the officer and walked back to her car. She didn't want to give Karen any more attention, but as she drove away, she caught a glimpse of Karen still talking to the officer, pointing at her car, as if trying to convince him she was right. The situation felt unreal, almost absurd. She knew this wasn't over. People like Karen didn't stop easily once they convinced themselves of something. Later that night, Laura sat at her kitchen table staring at her phone again. Her husband, Daniel, came over with a cup of tea and asked if she wanted to talk about it. She hesitated, then nodded. She told him how it felt to be judged by someone who didn't even try to understand. She explained how quickly fear had turned into anger, and how the truth no longer seemed to matter. Daniel listened quietly, his hand resting on hers. He told her that people like Karen often acted out of fear, and that reacting with anger would only feed it. He reminded her of who she was, impatient, fair, and strong. Laura smiled faintly. She needed that reminder. Meanwhile, Karen sat in her living room scrolling through comments on her posts. Some people were calling her brave, while others told her to stop spreading lies. The mixed reactions only fueled her more. She replied to almost every comment, defending herself, claiming she had seen danger in that store and would do it again if she had to. Her phone buzzed with notifications nonstop. She was getting attention and she liked it. But what she didn't realize was that she was also being watched now. Not by strangers, but by the same department she had accused of hiding something. The following day, Laura received a call from her supervisor again. He told her that the department's legal team was now monitoring Karen's online activity because she had crossed a line by posting false accusations against the police. They didn't plan to press charges yet, but they wanted to make sure things didn't escalate. Laura agreed and promised to stay out of it. Still, the situation made her uneasy. She wasn't afraid for herself, but she worried about how quickly one person's assumptions could spiral into something dangerous. By the end of the week, things started calming down again, or so it seemed. Laura returned to her routine, working her shifts and spending quiet evenings at home. Then one night, as she was pulling into her driveway, she noticed a car parked across the street with its headlights off. It looked familiar, but she couldn't be sure. Her instincts kicked in. She waited a few seconds before getting out of her car, watching closely. The car engine started, then slowly drove away. She caught a glimpse of the driver. It was Karen. Laura's stomach tightened. This was no longer just about an argument or misunderstanding. Karen was following her. She went inside and locked the doors, sitting quietly in the dark for a moment. Daniel noticed the look on her face and asked what happened. She told him everything. He wanted to call the police right away, but she told him she'd handle it through the department first. She didn't want to make the situation worse or give Karen more reason to feel targeted. The next morning, Laura reported what happened to her supervisor. He took it seriously and said he'd assign a patrol unit to occasionally check around her neighborhood. He also told her that Karen had been calling the police department repeatedly, demanding to speak to someone in charge about what she called a cover-up. Most of her calls were filled with wild accusations, and the officers had to politely hang up after explaining there was no wrongdoing. It had gone from a misunderstanding to harassment. Days passed, but Karen didn't stop. She showed up at the grocery store again, asking employees about Laura. She even went to the police station once, claiming she wanted to file a complaint, but left when asked to provide proof. Her obsession had reached a point where people in town started avoiding her. Even her online followers began losing interest as her story became repetitive and unbelievable. One evening, Laura was sitting at her desk finishing paperwork when one of her colleagues walked in. He told her that Karen had just been seen near the station again, arguing with an officer in the parking lot. Laura's heart sank. She didn't want to deal with her anymore, but she knew she might have to. She stood up and walked outside, taking a deep breath before stepping into the cool night air. When she saw Karen standing there, pacing and talking loudly, she felt a strange mix of pity and frustration. Karen stopped when she saw her and glared, saying something about justice and fairness. Laura kept her tone calm, telling her to stop and think about what she was doing. She explained again that everything she carried was legal, that she had no reason to lie or hide anything, but Karen wasn't listening. Her eyes were filled with stubborn certainty, like she had convinced herself that Laura was the enemy. An officer stepped forward and gently told Karen it was time to leave. She resisted at first, but finally turned and walked away, muttering under her breath. Laura stood there quietly, feeling a deep tiredness settle over her. She wasn't angry anymore, just sad. Sad that fear had turned someone into this. As she watched Karen's car disappear down the road, she didn't know that the next time they'd meet, everything would change for good. The next few days moved quietly, but an uneasy feeling followed Laura everywhere she went. She tried to focus on work, responding to calls, handling paperwork, and checking on her regular cases. But in the back of her mind, the memory of Karen's constant harassment stayed alive. Every time she drove past the grocery store, she glanced at the parking lot just to make sure that same car wasn't there. Most of the time, it wasn't, but she still felt watched. One afternoon, Laura was heading home from work when her radio crackled with a familiar voice. It was one of the patrol officers who had handled the first grocery store call. He mentioned that they had received another strange 911 report. Someone had called about an officer hiding something illegal in her car. The caller hadn't given a name, but the tone was familiar. The dispatcher had recognized the voice. It was Karen again. Laura exhaled deeply. She pulled over for a moment and rested her head against the steering wheel. She wasn't angry, just tired. It was exhausting to deal with someone who seemed determined to make trouble. She called her supervisor and informed him about the new report. He told her not to worry, that they were already logging every call Karen made. He promised her that soon there would be enough evidence to handle it legally. Still, Laura couldn't help but feel frustrated. All she had ever wanted was peace. At home, Daniel noticed her silence over dinner. She tried to smile and said everything was fine, but he could tell something was wrong. She finally told him about the latest call. He shook his head in disbelief. He asked if there was any way to file a restraining order, but Laura explained that until Karen did something more direct, it would be hard to prove harassment in a legal sense. Still, she promised him that she would push for it if things got worse. Meanwhile, Karen sat in her living room, scrolling through her phone, rereading the same comments on her videos. Most people had stopped paying attention. Some even mocked her for going too far. But Karen didn't see it that way. She told herself that people were blind to the truth, that she was the only one brave enough to keep pushing. Her obsession had started to blur the line between what was real and what she imagined. Late that night, as rain began to fall, Karen drove through town again. She told herself she was just running errands, but she found her car heading toward Laura's neighborhood. The streets were quiet, lit only by dim street lights and the reflection of wet pavement. She slowed down as she passed Laura's house, her wipers moving back and forth in rhythm. Through the curtain, she thought she saw movement, a shadow crossing the window. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, whispering to herself that she needed to keep watch, that something wasn't right about that woman. Inside the house, Laura and Daniel were sitting on the couch watching a movie when Laura noticed headlights outside. Her instincts kicked in immediately. She peeked through the window and saw a familiar car idling by the curb. Her pulse quickened. She quietly told Daniel to turn off the lights. They watched as the car stayed there for several minutes before slowly driving away. Daniel grabbed his phone, but Laura stopped him, saying she'd report it in the morning. The next day, Laura went to the station early. She filed an official report about being followed. Her supervisor nodded seriously, saying it was time to take stronger action. He assigned 2 officers to check on Karen's house and warn her to stop this behavior. He also suggested Laura install a security camera outside her home. Laura agreed. She wasn't the type to be easily scared, but this situation had gone far beyond annoyance. Later that afternoon, the officers visited Karen's home. They spoke to her calmly, telling her to stop following Laura and to stop making false reports. Karen stood in her doorway, her arms crossed, insisting she had done nothing wrong. She said she was exercising her right to report suspicious behavior. The officers reminded her that filing false claims was against the law, and that she could face serious charges if she didn't stop. Karen simply nodded, but her eyes told another story. She wasn't planning to stop. When Laura heard about the visit, she hoped it would finally end things. For a few days, everything seemed quiet. She went back to work, focused on her duties, and even started to feel like things were returning to normal. She and Daniel spent a weekend hiking near the lake, trying to clear their minds from all the stress. For the first time in weeks, Laura felt relaxed, but peace didn't last long. A few days later, while Laura was working the late shift, a report came through the radio about a disturbance at a small gas station near the edge of town. The description of the person causing trouble made Laura's stomach sink. It matched Karen. The report said she was yelling at the clerk and refusing to leave. Laura wasn't assigned to the call, but when she heard her name mentioned in the dispatcher's notes, she decided to check it out. When she arrived, 2 officers were already talking to Karen outside the gas station. The clerk stood inside, shaking his head. Karen was arguing, waving her phone, saying she had been investigating Laura and found evidence that she wasn't who she claimed to be. Laura stepped out of her car slowly, keeping her voice steady as she approached. Karen's face changed when she saw her. She shouted that Laura was following her, turning the situation upside down. The officers had seen enough. They told Karen to calm down and lower her voice. One of them pulled Laura aside, asking if she wanted to press charges for harassment. Laura hesitated. She didn't want to make things worse. But before she could answer, Karen suddenly reached into her purse and everyone froze. The officers quickly stepped in and told her to stop. She pulled out a small metal object. It was a stun gun. The officers moved fast, taking it from her hand before anyone got hurt. The tension in the air was thick. The officers checked the weapon and confirmed that she didn't have a permit for it. It was illegal to carry in that area without authorization. Karen started to panic, saying she carried it for protection, not to harm anyone. The officers tried to calm her, but her words became jumbled, her voice shaking with anger and fear. The situation had turned against her completely. Laura stood quietly, watching the scene unfold. She didn't feel joy or satisfaction, just a deep sadness that things had come to this. She stepped forward and told the officers she wanted to make sure Karen was treated fairly, that they didn't need to be rough with her. The officers nodded and handled the arrest carefully. They placed Karen in handcuffs, explained her rights, and walked her to the patrol car. As Karen sat inside, her eyes met Laura's for a brief moment. There was no more anger in them, just confusion, almost disbelief. Maybe for the first time she realized that her actions had gone too far. Laura stood in the rain, watching the patrol car drive away. The flashing lights reflected on the wet road, painting red and blue streaks that disappeared into the distance. Back at the station, Laura filled out the necessary reports. The officers confirmed that Karen would be charged with filing multiple false reports and carrying an illegal weapon. Her mental state was also being evaluated, as the constant calls and confrontations suggested deeper issues. Laura didn't say much during the process. She just signed her name and thanked the officers for handling it calmly. When she finally got home that night, Daniel was waiting by the door. He could tell by her expression that something major had happened. She told him everything. He listened quietly, then hugged her tightly. For the first time, she felt the weight of all the tension lift off her shoulders. She knew the situation wasn't completely over. There would still be questions, maybe even court appearances. But the fear that had followed her for weeks was finally starting to fade. Over the next few days, Laura went about her work with a sense of quiet strength. People at the station respected how she had handled everything with patience and professionalism. Her supervisor told her that her calmness had probably prevented the situation from escalating into something far worse. Laura appreciated the words but didn't feel like a hero. She had only done what felt right. Meanwhile, Karen's story spread again, but this time it was different. Local news covered the incident accurately, explaining how a false report led to an arrest. Many people who had believed Karen before now saw the truth. Her online posts disappeared and the videos she had once proudly uploaded were taken down. The noise around the story finally began to fade, replaced by silence. Late one evening, Laura sat outside on her porch, watching the sunset. The air was calm, the world finally quiet. She thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the anger, the misunderstandings, and how easily one person's assumptions could turn ordinary moments into chaos. She hoped Karen would get the help she needed, not punishment alone. Deep down, she believed that even people who lose their way can find a path back if given a chance. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Laura took a slow breath and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt peace returning to her life, one quiet evening at a time. The next few days after the incident were tense in their neighborhood. Everyone had seen the video that went viral online. People were talking about how a woman had called the cops on another woman who was legally carrying a gun, and how the situation had turned on the caller herself. For a while, it felt like everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. The woman who had been arrested, Karen, had been released on bail the following day. She came home furious and humiliated. Her neighbors avoided eye contact when she stepped outside. She had always been the kind of person who liked control, someone who kept a close watch on what others were doing. But now she felt exposed and powerless. The thought that people were laughing at her burned inside her. Meanwhile, the woman she had called the police on, whose name was Lena, tried to return to her normal life. She was quiet and reserved, the kind of person who didn't like drama. She worked long hours and kept mostly to herself. But now, because of the attention from the viral video, she couldn't go anywhere without people whispering. Some thanked her for standing up for herself. Others stared curiously, wondering how it must have felt when the tables turned that day. Lena's husband David tried to reassure her. He told her that they hadn't done anything wrong, that the law was on their side. But Lena couldn't help but feel uneasy. She didn't like being the center of attention. Every time she stepped out to get groceries or go for a walk, she felt eyes on her. She missed her peaceful, ordinary days before all this happened. Karen, on the other hand, had no intention of letting the matter go. She felt wronged. In her mind, she was the victim. She began talking to a few neighbors she knew, trying to gather sympathy. She told them that she had only called the police out of concern, that she didn't mean for it to go this far. But most people didn't seem convinced. Some even avoided her entirely. They didn't want to get involved. A week later, a local news reporter came to the neighborhood. The reporter wanted to interview Lena about the incident, asking how she felt about what happened. At first, Lena refused, but the reporter explained that her story could help others understand what it's like to be wrongly accused. After thinking for a while, Lena agreed. She spoke calmly, explaining that she was carrying legally, that she had all her paperwork in order, and that she hoped the story would make people think twice before judging others so quickly. The interview aired that evening, and it only made things worse for Karen. Viewers online praised Lena for her composure and criticized Karen's behavior. Karen's social media pages were flooded with angry comments. Her friends stopped answering her calls. Her job, which had already been shaky due to her temper and frequent complaints, suddenly became uncertain. Her boss called her in for a meeting and told her that her behavior reflected poorly on the company. By the end of the week, she was suspended. Lena didn't celebrate any of this. She felt no joy in seeing someone else's life fall apart, even if that person had caused her distress. She told David that she just wanted to move on, but the situation wasn't over yet. A few days later, there was a knock at their door. It was an officer, one Lena recognized from the day of the incident. He handed her an envelope and told her that Karen had filed a complaint. She was claiming emotional distress and defamation, saying the video had ruined her life. Lena couldn't believe it. She hadn't posted the video herself. Someone else had. Still, she felt a pit form in her stomach. She sat down at the kitchen table, holding the papers in her hands while David read through them. He told her not to worry, that they would find a lawyer and handle it properly. But deep down, Lena was tired. She just wanted peace. Over the next few weeks, both sides prepared for what was turning into a legal mess. Karen hired a lawyer who promised to restore her reputation. Lena's lawyer, a calm and thoughtful woman named Denise, explained that Karen's case was weak. The video was recorded in a public space and Lena hadn't done anything illegal. Still, the case dragged on. Every court date was filled with tension. Karen glared across the room while Lena avoided eye contact. As time passed, the public's attention moved on to other stories, but for the two women, the effects lingered. Karen's reputation was still damaged, and she was struggling to find stable work. Lena tried to keep her focus on her family and her job, but she couldn't deny that the experience had changed her. She had lost some trust in people. She noticed herself being more guarded, more cautious around strangers. One afternoon, Lena went to a community meeting organized by local residents. They wanted to talk about neighborhood safety and understanding laws around carrying weapons. She wasn't planning to speak, but when the host asked if anyone wanted to share their experience, she raised her hand. Slowly, she told her story, how one misunderstanding had spiraled out of control, how assumptions and fear could turn neighbors against each other. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled a little. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then people started clapping softly. A few approached her afterward to thank her for speaking up. They said her words helped them see things differently. Lena smiled, feeling a small sense of peace for the first time in weeks. Meanwhile, Karen watched the meeting online later that night. She sat alone in her living room, replaying the video again and again. She felt a mix of anger and regret. She couldn't decide which emotion was stronger. For the first time, she began to wonder if she had gone too far. If maybe deep down she had acted out of fear rather than reason. A few days later, Karen showed up unexpectedly at Lena's house. Lena was startled to see her standing at the door. She hesitated before opening it. Karen looked tired, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She said she wanted to talk. At first, Lena wasn't sure she should let her in, but something in Karen's voice, something softer than before, made her agree. They sat across from each other in the small living room. Karen took a deep breath and admitted she had been wrong. She said she was scared that day, that she thought she was doing the right thing, but now she realized she had made a mistake. She apologized for calling the cops for the trouble she caused. Her voice cracked as she spoke. Lena listened quietly. She didn't interrupt. She could see that Karen's apology came from a place of genuine regret. After a long pause, Lena said she forgave her. She didn't want to carry anger any longer. The two women sat in silence for a while, both of them reflecting on how much one moment had changed their lives. When Karen left that evening, she thanked Lena again. It wasn't a perfect ending. There were still wounds that time would need to heal, but it was a start. For the first time in months, Lena felt like she could breathe easily again. She stood by the window, watching as Karen walked away, her shoulders a little lighter than before. As the days went on, things slowly began to return to normal. The neighborhood grew quiet again. People moved on. Lena and David took walks in the evenings without feeling watched. The air felt calm, peaceful, almost like before. Lena knew she would never forget what had happened, but she also knew she had found strength in herself that she didn't know she had, and maybe, just maybe, the lesson learned that day would stay with both women for the rest of their lives.